welcome to my channel. My name is Alice. I go by HulloAlice here on YouTube and I make art videos. And today I am back with another another episode in my Watercolor 101 series. If you don't know what my Watercolor 101 series, it is an in-depth video tutorial series that teaches you everything you could need to know about watercolor. Well, everything that I know about watercolor. So if you check out my previous videos, I will link them all below. There's a playlist. It goes over materials, it goes into paints, it goes into paper, brushes. I go into depth about the kind of paint that is going to be good quality, what makes up watercolor paint, all of that good stuff. And then I teach you brush techniques. So my previous video was basic brush techniques, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you guys how to create texture with watercolor. I'm going to show you 7 really simple and easy ways to create texture with your watercolor paints. So if you are excited, then keep watching, and yeah, let's go make some texture. Okay, so the first technique that I'm going to show you guys for creating texture is going to be twofold. So there's two, they're like related. So the first is basically, I'm going to call it scarification because I'm not really sure what else to call it. But there's this thing in watercolors called granulation. So what granulation is when you paint your paper, the pigment of the watercolor will settle into the grooves of the paper. So this is going to be way more obvious with really textured paper, and you can kind of see, let me zoom you guys in on my color chart. So if you can see, especially present in the cerulean blue, in the olive green, and in the umber and the cobalt, you can see where the paper is divoted, the color is more concentrated, and that is called granulation. So obviously granulation can be a really beautiful texture by itself, and you're definitely going to want a rough or at the very least cold pressed paper to get really good granulation. But there's other things that we can do that kind of play off granulation and the fact the watercolor will get darker when sunken in. So you can basically kind of scar your paper to create lines, or to even lift up the paper and damage the fibers of the paper. Wherever the paper is damaged, it's going to sink in darker. I'm going to go ahead and paint over the top of this, and you guys will see as it sinks in, it's going to be darker right there. That's so beautiful. This is also a great way to add physical texture to your piece. Most of the techniques I'm going to be showing you today are visual texture, but this actually incorporates physical texture as well. I'm going to wait for this wash to dry, and then I'm going to show you guys another technique that we can use that also incorporates physical texture, and is going to be kind of the opposite of this, but your paint needs to be dry to do it. Okay, so I'm going to insert some close-ups of this guy and how the scarification worked out. The one that I did with this didn't work, I gotta be honest with you, but basically you really need to damage the paper in order for it to take, and it's still going to be pretty subtle. The two right here are the most obvious. I can't really zoom in well enough to show you, but like I said, I'll insert close-ups and stuff like that. You can see it in real life. So I would say cut the paper and cut it pretty deep, and use an X-Acto blade to have the most success with this technique. But the other technique that I wanted to tell you guys is when this is dry, you can lift it up with an X-Acto blade. You can also lift it up with water and a brush, but I believe I covered that in my previous video. And so basically you just scrape with an X-Acto blade, and you can scrape with the tip or the side, depending on the look you want to get, how much you want to cover. People use this a lot for water. So say you have a sea, and then you kind of pull back in these bright white highlights, and they tend to have a sort of rough texture to them, and that's really going to depend on the texture of your paper. This paper is not very textured that I'm using right now, so the higher texture your paper has, the more kind of wobbly these lines will be. But that's a really good technique as well, and again, it adds some physical texture to your piece, which can be really interesting and intriguing. So yeah, that is how you use an X-Acto blade to create texture in your watercolor as well. The next technique that I'm going to show you guys is a very classic technique that I'm sure you all have heard of, and that's using salt. The reason that salt works with watercolor to create texture is because salt absorbs the water, and you can create these really cool kind of star effects. So the best kind of salt to use is some sort of kosher salt. Preferably larger granules work a lot better than table salt. I'm using Epsom bath salt because it's what I have on hand. The granules are a little smaller than I would like, but it's nice and absorbent, so it should work well. The trick with using salt, and with a lot of these other techniques, is that you need to make sure that your paint is the right wetness when you put on the salt. So for the salt specifically, we want it to be wet and still a little bit shiny, but not soaking wet. So I'm just gonna wait a little bit for this to dry down just a tad, and then we're gonna put on the salt. If I put the salt on too early when it's too wet, then it won't really absorb anything. And if I put it on too late, then it won't really absorb anything. Basically, if it's too wet, it kind of absorbs everything really quickly, but it doesn't really take any pigment out because there's so much water there. I think that's how it works. I'm not like a scientist, this is just based on observation. So you don't get these like really crisp stars. If it's too dry, then obviously it can't absorb anything because it's dry. So you're kind of looking for that sweet spot in between. Okay, so the paint is still a little shiny, but it's not sopping, there's not any puddles anywhere. So I'm gonna take just a little bit of my salt and I'm just gonna sprinkle it lightly on top. You don't want too much. I might have let it dry just a little bit too much, but it should work. And as you can see, like the edges have dried faster, and you can see there's not as much of an effect there because they're already too dry. But it's working pretty nicely over here in the center, and as you can see, the salt is wicking up and wicking away the paint. So I'm gonna let that dry, I'll come back to it and brush it off, and then you guys will see what this texture looks like when it's finished. Okay, so this guy has dried and I've brushed off all of the salt, and as you can see there is a little bit of snowflakey texture. It's pretty subtle in this piece, but you can get it to be more dramatic depending on the color that you use and when you apply the salt, how wet it is, the paper that you're using, all that good stuff. It's just kind of one of those things you want to experiment with. But this would be a great effect for snow or ice, all of that good stuff. It's a great effect for that. And it's also just a pretty way to liven up a wash. For the next technique that I'm going to show you, you're just going to need a really, really common household item, and that is cling film. And this is a really, really pretty texture, but it does require a lot of patience because it takes quite a while to dry. I would recommend preparing your square of cling film before you paint your wash, because this one actually you do want to work pretty fast with, versus some of the others where you kind of have to wait for the paint to dry a little bit. So I've painted a pretty wet wash here. I haven't worried about it being even because we're going to create a texture. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my cling film and you're going to press it and wrinkle it on there. And you guys can already see the kind of texture that you're going to create. And then you're going to leave it there while it dries. This is the worst part about this. This takes forever to dry because obviously there's plastic on it kind of getting in the way of evaporation. So I would definitely recommend that you do this and leave this overnight if you can. It's just kind of the easiest way to deal with it. So I'll let this dry and then I will show you guys the finished texture. So I think you can see why this is one of my favorite effects. You can actually get more of a contrast if you let this dry fully. I'm trying to film this video. I didn't really want to wait overnight for it to dry, so I just peeled it off after about 20 minutes. But you can tell like it's a really, really cool effect that you can, like I said, make stronger or more subtle depending on the paint you use, paper you use, how long you leave the cling film on. I love this effect. I think it is so beautiful. For the next texture I'm going to show you, all you're going to need is some rubbing alcohol. I have this 91% isopropyl. I don't think it really matters what percent. I'm sure like the 70% is fine. I'm being pretty lazy with my washes here because they're all going to get texture on them anyway. Alright, so this is similar to the salt. Once you've painted your wash, you want to wait for it to dry just a little bit. Basically so that it's barely still shiny but still wet. Like you don't want it to be fully dry. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the level that this is at. It's ever so slightly, it's got like a little bit of a sheen to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the rubbing alcohol and I'm going to use a pipette. You could probably use a paintbrush. And then I'm just going to drip the rubbing alcohol onto the paint. Now as you can see, if the paint has dried a little bit too much, it doesn't really affect it. but it's pretty perfect right here in the center, so that's good. One of the things about watercolor is a lot of times your edges will dry before your center, so you gotta watch for that. So because the alcohol repels the paint, you get these really cool little bubble effect doohickey things. So I'm a fan of that one, and it doesn't require a lot of waiting for drying time. And you don't have to do drops. I mean, you could splatter, you could do drips, all that kind of stuff, whatever you want, but it creates a really cool kind of look, I think. So for the next one, the only thing you're gonna need is your handy dandy paper towel, which you should always have if you're doing watercolor. I've said that in my materials video as well. Paper towel is like a watercolor necessity. So I'm gonna use a dry piece of paper towel, ball that up in my hand, get a wash going. All right, this one is super easy. I mentioned in the previous video that paper towel wicks up watercolor, so you just press your paper towel in. You can get really hard-edged cool effects with this or really soft effects. It kind of depends on how you use it and if you like dampen your paper towel beforehand a little bit. But this is great for doing clouds. And I use this technique all the time, like all the time. It's also good for galaxies. So that was easy. The next technique that I have to show you is going to involve a sponge. So I have two here. This is more of like a household one, and this is a sea sponge. And essentially, all you do is you create your wash, like your puddle of paint over here, and then you just dip your sponge in. And you dab it. Oh my god, that was so hard. So this is great for foliage. You can get different effects depending on the different sponges that you use. Obviously this one's more condensed. You're gonna get a different effect, but it's super simple and super easy, and it's a great way to paint trees and bushes and all of that kind of stuff. If you're gonna pick a sponge, I would recommend a sea sponge because you can always build up more like coverage. So I think it's just more versatile. So the last textural technique that I wanted to talk to you guys about is pretty simple because all it involves is the watercolor and water. But I wanted to talk to you about it anyway. So you should have fun with your watercolor. And by that I mean drip it. Put in a bunch of water and tilt the page and dab it and make a big old mess of your desk. So drips are super fun. Splatters, oh, the cleanup. Splatters also super fun. I tend to take a brush, load it up with paint, and then I tap right here. You can also use a toothbrush, preferably not the toothbrush that you use every day. Dip that in your paint. Use your thumb. It's like a Smurf got murdered over here. The other thing that you can do is you can take water and you can drip water into your paint. Make it run, make it push away. If you've been watching the rest of my Watercolor 101 series, I've told you that paint goes where the water goes, but water will also dilute the paint, so it's going to dilute the pigment, right? So if you put a bunch of water in the center of your painting, it's going to push the pigment out and away from it. You kind of want to make sure your paint is the right wetness for that. But yeah, have fun with the actual paints themselves, you know? You can wick things up with your paper towel, throw on lots of water, drip things, splatter things. It's kind of the most basic textural technique that you can do, but it's one that I use quite a lot, so I felt like I should mention it. Okay, so I hope you guys liked seeing that. I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned something new. Let me know what your favorite texture is. I really like this one, and I think this came out really pretty too, but I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with watercolor. It's probably one of the reasons it's my favorite medium. You can just do really cool stuff with it. So I hope you liked this video. The next Watercolor 101 video will probably be a while. You guys know me. But we are officially done with technique. So if you have been following along, you have made it through materials, and now you have made it through technique. So just give yourself a pat on the back. The next part of the Watercolor 101 series that we're going to be moving on into is basically I'm going to do a real-time speed paint, not even a speed paint because it's going to be real time. So I'm going to walk you through how to create a painting and how to use these techniques in a painting, because it's one thing to learn these techniques when you're painting squares. It's another thing to incorporate them into your own artwork and figure out how to make them work for you. So I'm going to be showing you exactly how I paint. So just keep an eye out for that. There'll be real-time videos showing you exactly how I create a watercolor piece. Also, shout out real quick to my friend Lisa. She designed this awesome shirt that I'm wearing. It says, I put the lit in literature. She designed this and sold it with Cotton Bureau, and she is crazy, crazy talented. If you guys like talented designers, I will link her Instagram down below, but I just had to shout this out. It is so cozy. I love it so much. It makes my life. So that is it for this video. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you learned a lot. Let me know down below what your favorite technique was. If you are new to my channel and you liked what you saw, then come join the Wonderland family and subscribe today. Hit the bell to be notified every time I upload a new video. I do upload new art videos every single Friday. And that's it. So thanks so much for watching, and as always, have a great rest of your day. Bye guys!